All right. So I hope everyone, let's see. Make sure I get the right one, the right whole sheet. I hope everybody stayed dry. I forgot my umbrella this morning, so I had to run in very rapidly from the downpour, and it looks like it's let up out there. It's hot one day, cold the next. I hope nobody gets the flu as a result of the changing weather, which is not great for your health. So we're going to have a fairly abbreviated class. We need to go back today and pick up the chapter on preparing for success in sales. But what I try to do is throughout the semester is give you time to work on your individual sales project, which will be the culmination of the class at the end of the semester. So I'm going to give you some time today after we finish talking about success in sales to either work with your partner or to do research on a product and get your ideas about what it is that you're going to want to sell. And then on Thursday, I'm going to go around and ask you if you've picked out a product, and we'll talk about some of the challenges that you might have with regard to the product that you're selecting and selling. I've had people sell all kinds of stuff. Remember that everybody and their partners, so we'll work in groups in two ways in this class. We'll either have dyads for the group, or not for the group project, but for the sales presentation at the end, and then for the critical thinking challenges, we work in larger groups. Everyone will have to be in, so I say this again because every semester it happens that I have one group that just didn't get it, that you have to be both a buyer and a seller. So each pair will have to both be a buyer and a seller. You do not have to sell the same product. You can each choose different products. Now the advantage of selling the same product, if you choose to do that, is that you can work together on the research for the product and learning about the product's features and benefits, and you sort of lighten the workload, and that way your buyer also sort of already has some understanding of the product. Whereas if you sell two different products, you're going to have to train your buyer for the presentation on sort of the general background of the product and the buyer profile that you will create for them, so that you can get all the way through that rubric. So I'm going to give you time in class today. After we finish talking about Chapter 6, this chapter should go fairly quickly. Again, we're going back because I did the prospecting and the prospecting and data together, talking about those, the research part and data gathering together. So we're going to go back and talk about Chapter 6, and then you'll have some time. And I'll also be here if you want to ask questions. This is a good time at the end of the lecture today to ask me questions about the products that you might be considering selling. So that's where we're going to head for today. Product knowledge. Your text tells you that salespeople are often hired with very little product knowledge. Now, what we hope is that in the course of this program, if you choose to be a professional sales major, that one of the things that you'll do is you'll go and you'll get an internship at a company in an industry that is of interest to you. So generally, by the time you get your professional sales degree here at UCO, hopefully you have an idea of the industry that is going to be of interest to you. If you want to go into pharmaceutical sales, which we've had a lot of success getting people placed with pharmaceutical companies, or medical device companies like Henry Schein. And so they actually go in with a greater idea of what it is that they're going to be selling. But a lot of people don't. And historically, a lot of salespeople just went into sales. They went to work for a company, and maybe they didn't have a lot of knowledge about the product. I think this is one of the biggest reasons that we see a pejorative attitude, and pejorative means a negative attitude towards salespeople. Because they have salespeople that don't really know their product, and of course the epitome of this in many instances is things like insurance sales, furniture sales, and car sales, where they don't really know their product. They just go and they get a job, and they're not necessarily very good at really explaining to their customer and making their customer aware of what the product does and how it's going to help them. And so your text talks about the fact that a lot of people are hired with little product knowledge. Hopefully, as sales programs increase, we're one of only 100 in the nation right now, but they are increasing. As sales programs increase, this will decrease, and we'll see people becoming more and more specialized as they progress through a sales program. And that's certainly what we hope for you, is that you will take an interest in a particular industry, and generally speaking, by the time you go to nationals, for those of you that want to become sales students, and you go through the whole thing, and you go through the advanced course, and maybe the practicum in sales, you'll have done an internship, and you'll really know the companies that you want to target when you go to those conferences that we send you to for the job fairs and things like that. So product knowledge is really critical. One of the biggest reasons that salespeople fail, or that they don't engage in good customer lifetime value for their companies, is because they don't have a lot of product knowledge. And so it really is critical. So the product itself, products contain features. There are all kinds of features. So I am fascinated, I think I told you all this before, but we'll use this as an example in here. I'm fascinated with copy machines. I remember my mother owned a real estate company in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She owned the second largest real estate company. She also had a land development company. And I remember the copy machine that she got for her company. It was this monstrous machine, and you actually had to lift up on this thing, and you could make one copy at a time. And so for contracts at that point in time, it was really kind of a pain, because contracts, real estate contracts, are multiple pages, and machines at that time, unless you were a printer and you had a really sort of sophisticated machine, didn't collate for you. So now, what do copy machines do? So if you go down the hall to the copy room down here, what does the copy machine do? Well, you can take multiple pages. So for example, I ran off the roll sheet today, which is being passed around. And actually, I sent that, so the copier is not just a copier, it's also a what?
Scanner.
It's also a scanner, and it's also, since I sent it from the desktop, what does that make it?
Printer.
A printer. So it's a printer as well.
Can you fax from?
You can fax from them. Does anybody actually fax anymore?
What does that mean?
Fax?
Yeah,
There used to be these machines. They look like phones.
yeah.
Actually, the first one, again, going back way, way, way in time, my mother she was part of a franchise in the real estate business. So her office that she owned was a franchisee of something called ERA, which at the time stood for electronic, and ERA I think is still around, but they're not a very big company. At the time they were the most sophisticated high-tech company in America. And the reason they called it ERA is Electronic Realty Association, if I believe, I think that's correct. And the way they were electronic was that they actually had these machines that were called fax machines. And so it actually was this machine that you set, it had a drum on it, and you set a telephone receiver handle actually onto the machine, in this cradle in the machine, and then you dialed the number, even it could be a rotary dial, and then you turn the machine on and it would scan it in bits and send it over the phone line. And those were the first fax machines. Then fax machines got more sophisticated and they became actually the phone themselves. They looked like a phone and they were a copier. And you stick the piece of paper in and it would send it through the phone line to a destination. I don't know, does anybody actually still fax in the age of electronic?
Doctors do a lot.
Who does?
Doctors, like.
My office, we send out faxes a
Yeah,
bunch.
I work at a bank and we still fax loan documents.
Wow.
Why?
Because
We
some
either email or
businesses
fax.
have not, they don't like use email, they don't like to do something like that,
I find that incredible to believe, but I guess there are still, so there's these machines that are fax machines that, so yes, you can actually use the copier down there to send a fax. So it's online, you go in, you dial the number, and you hit the fax button, and it will send it over the phone lines or whatever to a destination, and it would come out as a fax. So going back to my example, this machine that my mother had, it was a big machine, and it was sort of messy. The toner, there were these bottles of toner, and you actually had to pour them in to a receiving bin, which toner is kind of this powdery stuff, and it goes everywhere. Now you just pull these cartridges in and out, and it's pretty clean. And so that's a feature, right? The fact that you have these nice cartridges that you just plug into the machine now, as opposed to having to pour the toner into this sort of bin in the machine itself. What is the benefit of having that feature? Being able to just plug the cartridge in. cleanly, yeah. If you were wearing a white shirt, I remember, again, going back to when you actually had to do this, realtors at that point in time actually went to their offices because everybody had a landline, that people didn't have cell phones, and so you went to your office, and realtors actually dressed, most people wore like a shirt and tie and then doing it. If you had to be the one that had to add toner, could be a big nightmare, because all of these little fine particles could get on your shirt and they would ruin it. So this is a feature that has a benefit, a specific benefit, which is that you can actually do this without getting yourself completely covered in toner. What are some of the other features of the copier? Well, you can fax, you can scan, you can email with it. It will collate, so you don't have to pick up the thing anymore and lay the copy down and then run copies. So again, back in the olden days, when my mother would do real estate contracts, they would go and they would make like 5 copies of each page, and then you would have to have your secretary sit there and lay them out and hand collate them and then staple the copies for the actual closing. You don't have to do that anymore, right? They've got staplers in the machine. That machine will actually print, or will actually hole punch the document in case you want to put it in a loose leaf binder. What else will that document do? Back in the day, there was no such thing as duplexing. You can now duplex. Right, you can make it two-sided so you save paper. So these are all features that have specific benefits. And there are, different options and adaptations that come along with the copier that you should know if you're going to sell them. The product performance, knowing about that. What is the normal wear and tear? What are the speeds? What are updates? What kinds of things are going to be available for your product or service that you need to know? Manufacturing, a lot of you will go into, and what we try to train for mostly, most of our students will go into business-to-business sales, not business-to-consumer sales. For consumers, oftentimes you don't really want to know about the manufacturing process, do you? How many people actually understand, for example, the way their car works? How many of you can actually work on your car? Every semester I have at least one student usually who tells me that they actually can work on their own car.
Does changing your oil count?
I guess changing your oil sort of counts. You have some idea of how to do that. Do you change your own oil?
Yes. One
Why?
of my dad's, because he has a little ramp that's fun, but I can't do it otherwise without the ramps.
Okay, so you like to change your own oil. I'm absolutely fascinated. Why would you want to do this? It's like,
I feel an old lady, I guess.
is your time worth nothing?
If I'm at my parents', then yeah.
Your time is worth nothing. Well, I could change my own oil. I know how to do it. I have some concept of how to do it. But why would I want to? Like, for $20, I can go get my oil changed, and I don't have to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
20.
What?
Where do you go? There you go.
Benton, Speed Lube, and Guthrie. There's lots of places that will do, for a basic oil change.
Yeah,
No.
but he's trying to sell you more.
They're
I
probably-
don't know about cars. I'm
They're
like, okay.
they're probably good with
Okay, well, $50, whatever. The point is that as an attorney, I bill at $350 an hour. And so, why would I want to waste my time changing my oil when I can sit there and as I'm getting my oil changed and letting somebody else do it for 20 or 50 or whatever it is that I pay? Yes, sir.
On Danforth, right here down the street, they give student discounts, just to let you know. It's on
Okay.
like $28.
What, where?
On Danforth.
It's like right on Danforth,
Is it the drive-in one?
by the sorority houses. Yeah, it's a drive.
Every time I go there, they make my car sound like it's about to die, so they.
Yeah,
charge
I
me.
know. I bought like a Groupon for $20 at Amazon like 98. I was like,
Because
okay.
they'll tell you that
Yeah,
they
you
all
need
this
to change
stuff
your
is
filters, your batteries.
Okay, tell them no.
I know, but I don't know anything about cars.
Yeah, and then I
Yeah,
don't
it's
want my
like
car to
a
die.
little
Oh my
drive.
Yeah, at
God.
least I know for the extra time.
They give like student
No,
discounts.
they're ripping you up.
Alright, so we're getting really far afield here on oil changes. I didn't realize that this would be such a fascinating topic this morning. But I can sit there and I can work on my phone for clients, and I can be billing and making money as opposed to actually going out and changing my own oil. And so most people, the point of this was talking about the manufacturing process. Most people don't have a really good idea of how, if they're a business to consumer, how the things that they use every day work. Do you have any real concept of how this phone operates? How many of you can take the phone apart and sort of put it back together? That's not true in the business-to-business world. You're probably going to need to know how things work and how the manufacturing process occurs, because you're going to have very technical, detailed specifications. So for example, when I was in industry, the company I worked for, and I've told you all this before, but again, redundancy is good, was called the American Education Corporation. We were an educational software developer. For the K-12 market, we developed learning management systems. Now, do the teachers that we were selling to actually have to know what the back end of the learning management system looked like? No, probably not. But when we would go out, again, we would use a team selling approach to this, and we would go out with our product development crew that would talk to the IT departments of various school systems so that we could explain to them, and they did have to know how it was that we coded things so that they could understand if they had problems, what they were going to need to do to adapt that product to their particular situation. So for example, we sold a lot, not just to K-12, but what's one of the things that happens to people who are incarcerated? One of the reasons that people are incarcerated in high numbers oftentimes is because they have lack of access to financial resources, they may not be highly educated, and so what do we call prisons anymore? We don't call them prisons, although we don't do a lot of what we do call them. They're called correctional facilities, and the idea is that you're going to do what? You're going to correct their behavior so that they can go back out into society. When we sold to prisons, one of the things we had to do is we had to actually manufacture, and we fabricated discs, because most school districts now that we would go into, we could download our products and our services into their computers. But when you work with a prison population, and that was one of our largest buyers in many instances, were state prison systems, because they wanted to provide access so that these inmates, if they hadn't gotten a high school diploma, could get a GED. We would have to go in and install, and so we would have to work with, and we would have to understand the technical specifications of the systems that we were working with. And in many instances at that time, a lot of them, so we would fabricate these discs, and there were actually, we had to go out, and there were some prisons that they didn't have optical disk drives on their computers. So we had to figure out a way in those instances to get them the software and download it onto their platforms, which may have been legacy software programs. And so the manufacturing process and those kinds of things becomes critical, because you're going to have to talk to the customer and their tech people, in my case, or other specialists about the methods and processes that are involved in manufacturing. And so that becomes an important issue. Channels, understanding the distribution channel is important, particularly again in the business-to-business context. For the most part, you all don't think about how the goods that you get to you get to you. If I asked you what percentage of the goods that you are using currently as you're sitting here playing with your cell phones and not listening to me, or your laptops, or looking at something else, how much of those goods were actually brought to you by a container ship? What percentage do you think were actually brought to you by container ship? 95%, 100%? You're high. You're close. It's 90%. 90% of everything arrives in this country by container ship. So 90% of everything, there's a woman named Rose George who actually does what's sort of an interesting historical type of marketing analysis and logistics, where she gets on a container ship in the United Kingdom and follows it all the way through the Suez Canal and through pirate territory around and into India to pick up goods. And so 90% of everything is actually shipped. One of the things that's interesting about shipping, and again, you all don't think of this as consumers, one of the things that's interesting about shipping is that as a result of shipping, we are able to do things enormously cheaply that you might not otherwise be able to do. But it actually is sort of a craziness in the respect of when you think about what's going on and the cost of labor in certain areas. For example, one of the things that she talks about is that fish that is caught off the coast of Scotland is actually put on a container ship, shipped all the way to China, 10,000 miles on a container ship, and then it's filleted and then shipped back to Scotland for consumption in restaurants in the United Kingdom. Isn't that sort of amazing to think? So you think you're at the port and you're getting fresh fish from right across over there. Probably not. It's probably been shipped quite a long way to be filleted because it's cheaper to fillet fish because labor costs in the United Kingdom and the United States are enormously high, and we have a hard time hiring workers to actually do that. So it's actually cheaper to ship fish across the ocean, 10,000 miles, and then back on container ships than it is to actually fillet it at the ports at which it is caught. So 90% of everything comes to you by ship.
Don't you think that's kind of like putting us at risk though?
What's that?
Shipping it that far and then trying to get it back and then eat consuming it? Like, that putting us at risk, or like would it be like better we just do it?
Would it be better if we just did it?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's not a big risk because they do it. I mean, with modern refrigeration, it's not a huge risk to do that. So, things like this. Now, Apple actually ships theirs. They actually fly their phones because they think the time is of the essence. They actually fly them, but other Galaxy or Samsung, the Galaxy, Motorola, people like that actually ship their phones on container ships. The cost to ship this piece of equipment across the ocean from China to the United States is about 3 cents. So shipping is enormously efficient. In Oklahoma, by the way, we have the farthest western and northern port in the country until you get to the west coast. So west of the Mississippi, we have the farthest northwest port, and it's the port of Catoosa, which is at Tulsa. The port of Muskogee is just below it. That's where I used to keep my boat. And so understanding these channels, again, for you all, you don't think about the fact that those pants that say Broncos on them, those sweatpants probably came from China and were shipped here on a container ship. You don't really need to know that. But why would a company need to know that? They're going to have to understand, and when you sell, they're going to have to understand your channels of distribution because time may be of the essence with regard to their products. If they're buying stuff from you so that they can manufacture a product, use it, and then resell it, they're going to have to know what the shipping schedules are like and what kinds of delivery schedules you can make, and they're going to have to understand those channels of distribution. And so those become critically important in understanding business-to-business sales. Are the channels vertically integrated, exclusive, or do they use a multi-channel strategy? What happens if something happens to your distribution system? Company performance and history is going to be important in the business-to-business context. In many instances, particularly if you're going into large business-to-business sales, so for example, if you go to work for Boeing or Honeywell or one of the other large defense contractors, in order to do business with them, they're not going to want to do business with some little startup company that has no corporate history or any track record in the industry in which they're working. So what's the growth? How quickly have you been able to achieve growth? What's your company history performance? Are you stable? Those kinds of things become critical. Service. Most products in the business-to-business context will require service after the sale, and it can be one of the most valuable sources of revenue for a company, and it can be one of the most valuable sources of revenue for you as a salesperson, because you may, as a salesperson, get residuals off of those service contracts, off of selling service. So the company that I worked for, one of the things that we did is we offered various levels of support to go along with the LMS that we were selling. And you got so many calls per month to our tech support for free, and you could also get packages where you were, bumped up in the queue if you were having issues with the product that you needed help with. And so we would offer sort of a platinum, a gold, a silver, and a bronze level package in terms of service. And for the salespeople, that was a great source because those contracts were on what we called evergreen renewals, and the salespeople got the residuals off of those evergreen. What is an evergreen contract? Anybody know?
Once a year.
Once a year?
All
Every
year
spring,
round,
no?
like evergreen trees are green all year round.
Yeah, evergreen trees are there's a difference between an evergreen and a deciduous tree. A deciduous tree is the ones that drop their leaves during certain times of the year. An evergreen, so what happens with an evergreen contract?
Never ends.
It just rolls over from year to year, or from period to period, whatever the period is, unless the customer actually stops it. How many of you have gotten into this? We bought something online and it has, a recurring residual charge that you get until you actually go in and tell them, stop doing it.
Have
And
to
you,
use it.
yeah, and you have to actually go in and tell them you no longer want your crappy service. And so those can be really important sources of revenue. And service after the sale becomes really, really critical. And we'll talk about service after the sale and what kinds of things you need to do to ensure. In many instances, the service after the sale is going to be as critical as the sale itself in terms of maintaining that customer lifetime value. In terms of them evaluating the products and services that you provide and whether or not they want to continue to do business with you. Knowledge of the competition. This is going to be really, really important as well. The company that I worked for, we knew who our competitors were. We knew what their advantages and disadvantages were in terms of what they had to offer. Where we competed was on price point. We weren't a flashy product. We were a very solid product with a stable platform, but we didn't have a lot of the games and a lot of the flash, whiz-bang stuff that things like, so the companies that competed against us, for example, were called Plato after the philosopher, and River Deep, and some others, and we knew what their products were, we knew where their strengths were, we knew where our strengths were, and we knew what our competitive advantage was in that market that we were selling to. We never sold, even though we were manufacturing, even though we were developed right here in Oklahoma, we never sold as much as we would have liked to have sold to school districts like Edmond. Why didn't we sell to Edmond? Well, we were the low-cost provider. We were a stable platform, we had good content, but it was not flashy. What is Edmond? Edmond, land of the shallow and pretentious. What do they want here in Edmond? Well, what do we know about Edmond from basic demographic information that you can get on Census Bureau? Edmond has the highest per capita household income of any community in the state of Oklahoma. The Edmond School District is one of the best funded in the state of Oklahoma. There's one that's actually funded. It's not as wealthy a community in terms of per capita household income, but it's actually a better school district. Anybody know what that school district is? No. It's Jinx. And Jinx actually has, they actually have a big benefactor. Christensen Trucking, the guy who owns that, lives in Jinx, and he just writes checks basically to the Jinx School District. And so it's like, one of my friends actually teaches in that district. She says it's like teaching in a private school, even though it's a public school system. So Edmond's very similar. They wanted, for their LMS, a lot more flash and whiz-bang. There are a lot more games that went along with it and things like that. And so knowledge of the competition is really, really important. And being successful in sales, knowing who your competition is, and knowing what their advantages and disadvantages are. Salesforce automation, customer relationship management is becoming a huge thing. And we actually did train for our practicum 1 year on Salesforce.com, and then they decided they weren't going to let us have trial subscriptions. And I'm not sure why they didn't, because it would be a good way to get students familiar with Salesforce. A lot of companies are using Salesforce, and I will show you this video on, it will launch hopefully, from here on Salesforce.
Salesforce IQ lets your team sell smarter with data-driven relationship intelligence. You can match it to your unique deal process and be up and running in minutes. It will automatically capture your team's relevant communication data like emails and meetings, to keep your team in sync. Add notes and tag collaborators to keep everyone informed about the progress of your deal. Intelligence fields update based on your activity history and give you the most relevant information on your prospects and customers. Suggested follow-ups will remind you when to reply to your customers so you never miss an opportunity. And you can even surface the right person to contact using closest connections. Seamlessly update the status of a deal or the potential revenue right from your inbox the moment it happens with Salesforce IQ's Chrome extension and mobile apps. Activity, pipeline, and sales reports update in real time so your team will consistently have insights into the activities necessary to hit your goals. Sell smarter with Salesforce IQ.
So we have so much access to data. And one of the things that you saw there in that was something called a marketing dashboard, which provides you with visual displays of your data. How do we pictorially display this data in a way that's useful to your sales force, your sales team, your sales manager? And Salesforce does a really good job of that. So database management is going to be critical. No matter what platform or customer relationship system you use, it's only as good as the data that you put into it. If you put garbage in, you're going to get what? Garbage out. And so database management is critical. Maintaining those contacts, keeping them up to date, keeping your database up to date is a critical thing. Understanding the capability. We have so much access to data anymore, but sifting through that big data and understanding how to use it in a very efficient manner is going to be really critical. I suggested to you in the prospecting exercise that one of the things that you should do is you can find out a lot and a wealth of information about social styles and people using social media sites, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, things like that are all rich sources of information, but making sure that you get the information that's most useful to you for the type of product, service, and company that you are working with and supporting. So what are the advantages of technology in sales? Well, they've improved communication, as Salesforce, as the demonstration showed. It can show you how to follow up or when to follow up with people. So it's improved communications. It's certainly increased productivity. People don't have to, again, going back to my example on the copier, at the time my mother owned a real estate company in the 1980s and 1990s, realtors actually had to go to their office. How many realtors actually go to their offices now? Usually just to sign contracts or things like that. Most of them work out of their home or out of their car because we now have these wonderful things that allow us to work more efficiently. So we can work from all kinds of places. I can work on the plane with my small netbook, things like that. I can actually work on a plane on my iPhone if I need to. It's difficult to do in that small space, but I can still be productive in lots and lots of places. So it's increased productivity. This is one of the things where you have to understand how, again, all of this stuff sort of integrates. So when we talked about environmental scanning the environment, understanding how the legal environment impacts these kinds of things. Things like the UCC. The UCC was updated to include what constitutes a signature. So forever and ever and ever, because in the United States, we still, in the sale of goods over $500, the most recent version of the UCC has raised that limit to $5,000. But under the old version, which a lot of states still use, sales of goods over $500 had to be evidenced as a result of something called the Statute of Frauds, which every other nation, by the way, has done away with, the Statute of Frauds, with the exception of the United States. Those things have to be evidenced by a what? For those of you who've had legal environment or business, right? How many of you have had legal environment or business? What do you have to have for the sale of goods over $500?
Contract.
But how do you evidence a contract?
Receipt or invoice?
No. Not necessarily. That may be evidence of the contract. So one of the things that you should have learned in legal environment business is that you'll have this piece of paper that says contract on it, and that's not the contract. It says contract, but that's not the contract. What is the actual contract? Well, the actual contract is the meeting of the minds. This is evidence of a contract, but it is not the contract itself. It's evidence of a contract. So the UCC says that for sales of goods over $500, you have to have a writing. What constitutes a writing now in the electronic age? Well, in the past, it was this thing that said contract. That's not actually the contract. The contract is actually the meeting of the minds. It's when you have a promise given in exchange, P1, given in exchange for something of legal value, which is usually P2, through the doctrine of consideration, which is bargain for exchange. That's when you have a contract. It's the precise meeting of the minds. Well, the UCC modifies that in a number of ways in that you don't have to have the actual moment. You don't have to be able to identify the actual moment in which the contract occurred, because it may occur through a course of dealing or a series of communications. But if it's for a sale of goods over $500, it has to be evidenced by a writing. What constitutes a writing? Well, in the olden days, the writing was, this is not the contract, it's evidence of the contract, but it was this evidentiary piece that if you wanted to enforce that contract, you had to have. You had to be able to go in court and present this. Well, in a technologically sophisticated, what is this now? It's probably not going to be this actual piece of paper, is it? It's going to be what? It's going to be bits of data saved on a screen. And so electronic signatures, things like that. Understanding that legal environment and how it plays a part. So what constitutes a signature for UCC purposes now? You all do this all the time. You sign contracts, you don't even think about it. What do?
And you check like agree.
And you enter a PIN number, or you enter your initials, and you click to agree, and then they can trace it back. That constitutes a signature. So understanding those kinds of things. What's the bad part about technology? Now, for all of these advantages, what's the bad part about this? Or what are some of the disadvantages that technology has led to?
Or in case someone hacks your information and stuff like that, they can
Okay,
hack
that's
it.
one of the big, data management is a huge thing. If your information gets hacked, if your Salesforce account gets hacked, people can get all kinds of information on your customers, and that's going to lead to a services failure on your part, and they're going to be very unhappy probably. How many of you would stop using a company if you found out that your information was compromised, your data was hacked, and you got this huge amount of liability as a result? That's one of those things that's critical. What else is a disadvantage of all of this information? So hacking is a disadvantage that we have to be aware of. What else could be a disadvantage? Just figuring out. I mean, the fact that you have lots and lots of information, and the fact that you can manipulate it in lots and lots of different ways doesn't necessarily mean that it's useful information. And so trying to mine that data for what is actually useful and what's junk is going to be critical. So I suggested to you that you can go through things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and figure out the social styles of your prospect. But there's probably a whole bunch of data on there that's also just what?
Useless.
Garbage that you have to sort through. So how are you going to sort through it? Just lots and lots of stuff that pops up that may be completely useless to what you're actually searching for. So everything, and I told you at the beginning of class, and this is one of those things, there are a number of things that should come tripping off your tongue by the end of the semester if you've had me for this class or if you've had me for Principles of Marketing. 1, marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. That should come tripping off. 2, marketing is a pervasive social activity. That should just come tripping off your tongue by the end of the semester. I say it over and over and over again. The third is that differentiation is perhaps the most important word in marketing today. Everything is differentiated. Even things that are commodities are differentiated at this point. What is a commodity? So what are commodities? Commodities are oftentimes traded on commodities exchanges. What's a commodity?
Something special, kind of rare, right?
Not necessarily.
Isn't like just more the common good that you use often?
So pork bellies are a commodity. Right? That's a commodity. Even the most sort of mundane of things has become differentiated. Water. I never thought I would see a day in my life when a gallon of water cost more than a gallon of gas. But it does. Why? How have they differentiated? What makes Ozark different from what's Coca-Cola's water product? Dasani. Even water is differentiated at this point. What makes Dasani different from Ozark?
The mountain.
The mountain, yeah, I don't know. One of the things that's interesting about this area is we differentiate water, and they don't actually have to do much to it. There's no regulation at this point of the water industry, the bottled water industry. And so they can do what? They can pull it right straight out of the tap and bottle it.
Not a thing they're saying is raw water that's not been treated or?
Not been treated. Is that a good idea?
I don't know, but it's like $4 for like.
I'm not sure that that's a really great idea, raw water.
I mean, I could go out and drink out of a puddle and not pay $4.
Yeah, you might not want to do that, right? The dog from down the street might have peed in the puddle. There might be all kinds of things that you don't want.
Well, all kinds of stuff have been in that one, and they're still, they're paying all this money to drink it, so.
One of the things, I mean, if you've noticed, one of the reasons that water is even differentiated now is that we have decided that we want to be more health conscious, and so people, I see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bottles of water in here. 5 bottles of water in here. Why is it that you drink bottled water?
Stay hydrated.
To stay hydrated. Well, why is it that you like bottled water as opposed to just going down to the water fountain?
It tastes nasty.
I live in Guthrie, and we have like perpetual problems with our water system for some reason. The water is always like, sometimes it comes out of the faucet and it's brown. The nice thing about bottled water is that it tastes the same. You know, Dasani is going to be tasting the same, however they filter it or whatever processes they use. So even water is differentiated at this point, and even the most mundane of products are differentiated. When I was growing up, again, you got eggs from, eggs were pretty much sourced within a region, and you got whatever was locally produced. Now they have big producers of eggs that have all kinds of things. So there's Eggland's Best. What is Eggland's Best? What's their differentiate? They stamp a little stamp on each egg. I don't know that makes it a better egg, but they say that it's a better egg. There's free-range eggs. There's organic eggs, eggs that are produced, that haven't been, that have not been given any hormones to the chickens when they eat them. One of the things that they do now, or became big in the early 90s through the 2000s, was we realized that we could get chickens to produce better eggs by feeding them all kinds of things like what? Hormones and antibiotics. It also plumped up the chickens really, really quickly. One of the things that has happened, so every year the president pardons 2 turkeys and they go to this farm, I think in Pennsylvania, it's the same farm every year. And so they actually did a special where they went to this farm to see how these turkeys are living, like are there all these turkeys just running around at this farm from all the years that the president's, and it turns out that these birds die pretty quickly. They send them there and they die within about a year and a half. Why is that? Well, we have basically bred turkeys and then modified them by giving them growth hormones and stuff like that to do what? To grow very quickly, to put on a lot of fat and meat very quickly so that they can be harvested really quickly, And as a result, these turkeys die of heart attacks at a very young age. These are not like wild turkeys out there roaming free and in a state of nature and living years and years and years on end. They grow, chickens are the same way. They are been bred to grow very quickly, get fat, and fall over and die fairly quickly if they're not processed. So now people are saying, well, maybe I don't want all these hormones, I don't want all this stuff in my chicken, I want free-range chicken, I want organic chicken, I want, all these kinds of different things. And so even the most mundane of products are now differentiated in the market. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to decide what the segments of the market are. How can we segment the market? There are a variety of ways that we can go about segmenting the market. The easiest way to do it is probably just on basic demographic information. Just going to the Census Bureau and figuring out, for example, in the population what the makeup is. And lots of restaurants, for example, use just basic demographic segmentation to decide whether or not they're going to open a restaurant. If you want to open an Outback, for example, you have to have a town that has a population of 50,000 or better. They have to have a certain per capita income. They just know that. They know from their metrics that basically Outbacks are successful in locations where there are about 50,000 people and the household income is above a certain level. I think it's $35,000. So you have to have that kind of level of information. That's an easy way to do it. You can also do it by geographic segmentation. So the example I give here is when I got my PhD, I was born in New Mexico and raised between Oklahoma and New Mexico for all my life. My father still lives in New Mexico and owns a ranch there. If you go to the Yamaha dealer in Oklahoma, what kinds of products do you find the Yamaha dealer selling in Oklahoma that you're not going to find them selling in New Mexico? What does Yamaha manufacture? What's Yamaha's personal watercraft? It's called a wave runner. That's their brand for personal watercraft. It's the wave runner. If you go to the Yamaha dealer in Oklahoma, you find lots and lots and lots of Yamaha watercraft for sale. And you find some quads for sale. But we have far more lakes and bodies of water to use personal watercraft on than they do in New Mexico, where there's basically one big lake in the middle of the state called Elephant Butte, and that's the only one that's really big enough to have water. I mean, there's a few others, but they're very few and far between. What do you see at the Yamaha dealer in New Mexico? Well, there's lots of land that's owned by the government. It's open, it's desert. What do they sell a lot of at the Yamaha dealer in New Mexico? They sell a lot of dirt bikes, they sell a lot of quads. They sell a lot of side-by-sides. Because what is it that people there do? Instead of going to the lake, because there aren't a lot of lakes, they sell a whole lot of stuff. So we can segment things by geographics. And then psychographics, which is the VAL survey, which I think I've showed you all before, which really segments people into 8 different types. In the business-to-business market, we have the North American Industrial Classification System, which tells you about industry groups and provides a lot of information on those. And so that's important ways of breaking down. So what is a segment? A segment of the market is people who have a similar need and will respond similarly to a marketing persuasion. Once we've segmented the markets, we then have to select the segments that we're going to actually market to, and that's called targeting. And then finally, in targeting, after we target the segments, we're going to have to make a connection in the mind of the consumer, and that's called positioning. Where is it that you want to be in the mind of your consumer? If I give you names like McDonald's, certain things come to mind, and that's their position in the market. I generally think that McDonald's, the position that they have in the market is they're consistent, fast, and cheap. That's McDonald's 3 key successes. They're fast, they're cheap, they're consistent. The thing that's important about this is that once you establish your position in the market, it can be very difficult to change that position. The company that I sold for, again, was the low-cost provider. At one point in time, we decided we wanted to have a higher-cost platform and start targeting more schools like Edmond. It was very difficult because we had already established ourselves in the market, and the mind of the consumer that we had which were educators, were that we were a reliable system, but we were the low-cost provider. Once you establish your position in the market, it can be very difficult to reposition yourself. McDonald's is trying this. They are losing market share, particularly in their most profitable segment, which is the breakfast market, to things like what? Starbucks. So what is McDonald's trying to do? If you look at their restaurants, they're doing away with the kiddie playgrounds, they're becoming more sleek, they're beginning to look more like a Starbucks. I'm not sure how successful that repositioning is going to be, because that's not what the consumer has in mind. The consumer doesn't think, if I want a Frappuccino, McDonald's now has this McCafe, which is, they had cheap, crappy coffee forever and ever and ever. And now they've decided they're gonna have, Frappuccinos and whipped cream stuff and lattes for breakfast. That's not what the consumer thinks of when they think of McDonald's. And so it's very difficult once you've established yourself and once you've established your position to maybe change it. So it's really, really critical that you think about this, where you want to be in the market when you're starting. But understanding this from a sales perspective, understanding what your position is in the market. What is it that comes to mind for your consumers is going to be critical. And again, that goes along with training. The company should train you on these kinds of things. Motivation, and then I'm going to give you the rest of the time to work on your projects. Motivation. Fear is a great motivator. It's external. Generally, that's in the form of things like quotas that salespeople have. One of the things that's a disadvantage of a sales career, if you are not highly motivated, you may not survive, because if you're not selling more than your salary, and it's going to be a lot more than your salary, they're going to fire you. Incentives are also external. Those are things that Salesforce managers can give to incentivize their salespeople. Good salespeople have internal motivation. They have good attitude. They're highly motivated to make money. They're highly motivated to succeed and be successful. They set goals, and they follow through on those goals. People who actually write down their goals are more successful than those who don't. What constitutes a good goal? A good goal is what? It's specific, it's measurable, and it's realistic. Those are, yes, it's attainable. Yeah, realistic. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have, and good salespeople have stretch goals. I want to be the #1 salesperson in my company. But they should be attainable. So they are specific, measurable. You can have a specific goal that's not measurable. What's a specific goal? I want to prove the existence of God. That's a very specific goal. Is it measurable? I guess you could sort of, you're either going to, is it attainable? Probably not. How are you going to measure whether or not you've proved the existence of God? Specific, how are you going to measure that? Number of people that you convince to believe in it? I don't know. All right, so I'm going to give you the rest of the hour to work with your partner or to do research, and then on Thursday I'll go around the room and sort of ask you about what you are thinking about selling, so that we can get some ideas about where you're headed for your sales presentation.